This video is sponsored by Describe. When you're playing a spellcaster in Dungeons & Dragons or another fantasy role-playing game like Daggerheart, Drawsteel, or Shadowdark, what does it look like when you cast a spell? Does your character just wave a wand, or do they have to move their hands in an intricate array of particular movements? What magic words do they use? What does the magic itself actually look like when it manifests? D&D is a game that takes place in our collective imaginations, and so the more you can describe your spellcasting for the other players at the table, the easier it is for everybody to form a collective mental image of the events of the game. Now, you don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about what your magic looks like. For some players and some groups, trying to form a precise mental image just is not a priority. Some D&D players literally have a different approach to mental visualizations. Players with aphantasia don't form a mental movie in their heads, so for them, trying to come up with a visual description of magic or waiting for another player to do so might not help with their immersion in any meaningful way. But even if you are someone more like me who puts a lot of energy into describing visuals, well, that doesn't always mean that describing your spellcasting is your biggest priority. As a magic user, you might already have a lot going on. You might be trying to figure out how much damage you're going to need to roll, whether your targets are in range of the spell, where exactly to place the fireball so you blow up as few of your party members as possible, if that's a thing you care about. If your dungeon master puts you on the spot by asking what the magic looks like, it's okay to not have an answer ready. It is completely optional to go into more detail. It's fine to just say, I wave my hands and mutter some magic words and then there's a fireball. And some spells will actually give you a lot more detail in the description themselves. Burning Hands tells you exactly what it looks like, what you're doing with your hands, and where the fire comes from. When I played a wizard from levels 1 to 20, my game master would often ask me what my magic looked like, since we were really trying to paint a visual picture, especially because we had a podcast audience at the time. And if there was an official description, that did most of the work for me. When I would cast Disintegrate, I would describe a thin green ray that springs from my pointing finger, because that's what it said in the book, and that's a very strong visual. But I also think it can be incredibly fun to sit down and try to figure out what your magic looks like. What is your character doing with their hands, and what sorts of magical effects does everybody else see? And you can absolutely do the same thing as a dungeon master when you're running your own spellcasters. But honestly, this is a video mostly for players, because this is one of the best ways I've found to really dip your toes into describing things at the table. You can basically set the template for what your magic looks like, and conjure an image for your fellow players. Pun intended. And it's a really fantastic way to develop this skill in a low-stress environment, so you might start to feel more comfortable trying your hand at running a full D&D game in the future because you've practiced describing things in the game world. And even if you do have no interest in running a game at some point down the road, it can just be really cool and rewarding to describe your magic in really fun and interesting ways that say a lot about your character and can help express your characterization in some interesting ways outside of just typical role-playing. And it can really help to create a strong mental image of the world of the game. And so today we're just going to talk through some of the different approaches you can take to describe your magic and how your spells can reflect your character's personality, their past, or their personal arc. And the reason we're talking about this is because this is a patron-voted video. I have polls on my Patreon where backers can actually vote to decide which video I'm going to discuss in the future, and this won a poll last year, so it's one of the first videos we're doing this year. And there's another poll up there right now, so if you want to vote on future videos, make sure to join the Patreon or become a YouTube member. Also, at the end of my last video, there was some sort of magical spell, and this stack of movies and TV shows showed up next to me. And fortunately, they're all perfect examples for this exact topic, so I was able to watch through these and find good examples that made sense and help illustrate my points throughout this video. But that's pretty weird, right? So let's talk about what magic can look like and what those descriptions can teach us about whoever's casting a particular spell. Now, D&D spells require some combination of the following components: verbal, material, and somatic. And these three components can do a fantastic job of giving you a great starting point to imagine what it looks like when your character casts a spell. Later in this video, we'll talk about what your magic looks like once you actually produce it, but first let's talk about what you look like when you conjure it. And let's start with somatic components, which are just the physical movements you make when you cast a spell.
Wish and flick.
Imagine the different ways that you can use your hands and what they communicate about your magic. For example, let's take the idea of telekinetically moving somebody against their will and see how different somatic movements carry different connotations. Pointing a finger suggests surgical precision, or giving your target a command they cannot refuse. Casually waving your hand makes your magic seem effortless, and clenching your fingers implies that you need to, at the very least, replicate the same motions you'd go through if you were physically holding a struggling target. The more you move your hands, the more it seems like you need to exert energy to move something or someone else. And the less you move your hands, the more control it seems like you have. However, the more you have to move your hands, especially when casting magic spells, Well, also the more it seems like you're calling upon a specific ritual or practice, like you have to perform certain motions in order to cast these specific magic spells because those are the traditions you were taught. Doctor Strange has a lot of great examples of somatic components across his many movie appearances. Despite the fact that they call him a sorcerer, he is the perfect example of a D&D wizard. He has no innate magical ability and he learns magic from books and practice. And his hand movements really look like the somatic components I always imagined you need to cast spells in D&D. It seems like he was taught these precise motions that produce consistent results, which lines up with the way wizards work in D&D. On the other hand, a D&D sorcerer's magic is innate, so their spellcasting is more likely to be self-taught, so their somatic components might be more literal, clearly representing the spell in some other way.
What I hate in movies is when people who have magic powers just go like this. So I always try to find like a cool finger thing to do or something. For the cloud spell, I ended up doing kind of like a goop in a pan full of cloud and then like a fire motion, which I thought was interesting. I also always just try to trip up the people in post to see how they're going to CGI the magic around my fingers.
Speaking of finding a way to represent the internal logic of your magic through your hand motions, look at the bending in Avatar: The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra. When benders want to manipulate the elements, they pretty much have to move their arms and sometimes put their whole bodies into it, and each different bending style is modeled after the movements of a different martial arts discipline. But you don't really need to know anything about martial arts in order to understand what you're watching, because each bending discipline, and often each individual maneuver, has its own internal logic. The reason the creators modeled each bending style after a different martial art isn't just because they were interested in martial arts, although they were, and more on that in a minute, but they wanted each bending style to represent the element in some way. Waterbending's movements are based on Tai Chi because it's more fluid, whereas earthbending requires you to have a more solid stance so you can handle the manipulation of the earth, so the creators looked at Hung Gar. You can do the same thing in your own games. You don't have to study individual martial arts or anything like that, but you can still think about what sorts of postures and movements might do the best job at capturing whatever spell you're trying to conjure. You don't have to describe specific punches or kicks or hand movements or stances. Instead, think about how, for example, your movements are more fluid, like the water you're manipulating, or the fact that you're conjuring fire with quick, intense punches and kicks helps do a good job of channeling the energy of that element. Of course, if you're already passionate about martial arts in real life, feel free to fold that hobby into your gaming hobby. Another fun way to find the internal logic of your spellcasting is to incorporate your other interests and passions. I once played a bard who was mute, and so all of her spellcasting was based on real-life American Sign Language, because at the time I was trying to basically make sure I didn't lose the skill that I learned in college. Unfortunately, that was before COVID and a lot of isolation. I don't really get a chance to use that skill at all anymore, so it is definitely atrophied. I can still say a few words that we've taught our toddler, like more, please, thank you, cookie, all done. And of course, I can still sign all the lyrics to the song Tell Her This by Delamitri, but that's about it. But when I played that character, I was combining two of my passions, and this meant that each spell had specific somatic components, and these hand movements had a very clear internal logic. This brings us to the next thing to consider when you're describing your spells at the table: verbal components. Now, I could do a whole other video about coming up with verbal components for specific spells and what makes the most sense for your spellcaster, because I think it would be fun to pick a character that I plan to play in a real D&D game and figure out all the words they use to cast their spells. But today we can talk about coming up with a consistent approach to the logic behind your magic words and what that would look like. In the Spectacular Spider-Man, when Mysterio first appears, he's posing as a sorcerer, just like in Spider-Man Far From Home. But in that cartoon, whenever he appears to cast a spell, he shouts something in Latin. Sometimes it's a very direct representation of his quote-unquote magic. When he casts a spell to sap someone's energy, he shouts dormi, which is Latin for sleep. Fulmina verite means come, lightning. He says that when he's conjuring a lightning bolt. However, other times he might call out a whole phrase in Latin, and most of those are just unrelated nonsense. Even though he's a fraud, the reason Latin works so well as the foundation for your spellcasting and your magic words is because we associate Latin with dusty old tomes and archaic knowledge. In the Harry Potter franchise, all the spells sound vaguely Latin.
Wingardium Leviosa.
Obviously, that's not real Latin, but within that spell, you have two words that kind of sound like wing and levitate, so those magic words make it very clear that this is the levitation spell. It's not a real language, but it sounds like it could be something close to Latin, which lines up with the idea that these are spells found in dusty old books, arcane knowledge from the old world. Of course, you could also take an approach where you don't have to do a whole bunch of prep and invent fake words for each spell. You could just do it once. Whenever Raven from Teen Titans would cast a spell, she would always use the same words.
Azarath Metrion Zinthos!
Now the first word, Azarath, is a reference to her home dimension, from where she draws her powers, but the other two words are made up. Well, I mean, technically so is Azarath.
What was made up?
But the point is, Raven's writer, or in our analogy, her player, only had to come up with 3 fake words, and then the character had her magic words for all of her spells. Of course, you don't have to invent any fake words at all. The DC Comics character Zatanna speaks backwards for most of her spells, which means if you're writing that character, or playing that character, you can just come up with the English words that would describe the magical effect you're trying to produce, and then just write them down, reverse them, and read them aloud.
Now bake him off, Jake!
Once again, it sounds like an arcane language, but it's something you could conceivably come up with in the moment at the table. Similarly, Nico Minoru from The Runaways, the Marvel Comics characters, not the band, can just use normal English to cast a spell. She can just issue a command and her staff will make that spell happen. But she can never phrase it the same way twice. The spell won't activate unless she chooses a new way to issue the spell every time, even if she's trying to produce a similar effect that she's tried before. Now, first of all, between that requirement and the fact that she has to conjure her staff by bleeding, she's not beating the Warlock allegations anytime soon. But also, that's a lot of extra work for a player to put themselves through, and it's not necessary, but it would be a very fun challenge. And more importantly, it would say a lot about the hoops your character is forced to jump through to cast their spells, and the requirements that are put upon them by the source of their magic. Although honestly, my favorite approach to magic is when somebody says words in English, but they have some specific phrase that they have to say to conjure each spell.
Into the light I command thee.
Full of nature I command you, bring forth thunder and lightning!
I summon forth the shielding powers of the Vishanti!
Again, returning to Doctor Strange, he does this all the time in the comics. I'm sure the filmmakers were worried that general audiences would think it would sound silly if Benedict Cumberbatch shouted about the crimson bands of Cyttorak as he wrapped up Thanos in magical runes, but regardless of my personal feelings about whether or not filmmakers should cater to audiences with boring taste, when you're playing a game like D&D, it can be really fun to invent these invocations that imply there's this larger mythology for your character to draw upon for their magic. And for those who were curious, when I played my Mute Bard, my DM agreed to allow me to still cast spells that had a verbal component, but basically replacing them with a clap or a snap or a whistle or a tongue click or some other sound you could make without activating your vocal cords. So still making it with your mouth or incorporating into the somatic components, either way worked fine. So mechanically, there really was no difference for the character, it was just flavor. Now, some spells don't just require somatic or verbal components, but also material components, some sort of object needed to conjure the magic. In order to cast Message, you need a small piece of copper wire. To cast the Fly spell, you need a feather. Sleep requires a pinch of sand or some rose petals. However, these spell descriptions don't tell you how to use these components. That's ultimately up to you. But these material components provide a lot of rich opportunity for different flavorful descriptions. This is something that Liam would do all the time when he played Caleb in Campaign 2 of Critical Role. He would try to fold the material components into the somatic components to make it all feel like part of the same practiced ritual.
I take a bit of phosphorus and squelch it through my hand and cast Wall of Fire.
You can also look at specific material components and see how they might inspire you to create a more comprehensive visual for what it looks like when you cast the spell. The spell Witch Bolt requires you to use a twig that has been struck by lightning. Do you point that stick forward like a wand and the lightning comes from inside the twig? Or do you press your finger against the stick, draw the lightning out of the twig, and fire it from your hand? It's a concentration spell, so whatever you're doing, you're going to be doing it for the rest of the fight. Are you pointing this stick like a wand as it forms a constant link of lightning with your foe? Or is the lightning coming from your hand? And is it either blasting forth from your fingertips or your palm? Or are you maybe holding one end of this bolt of lightning like a leash or a chain that you've wrapped around your enemy? The spell Color Spray requires a pinch of colorful sand. I like the idea that you could throw that in the air and it would become this magical blast of light that flashes in the air and blinds your opponent. The Sleep spell also uses a pinch of sand, but for that spell, I usually imagine that you have the sand in your hand, in your palm, and you blow into it, and it'll basically become this cloud that surrounds your targets. Or if you want something less flashy, there's also something very cool about just running the sand through your fingers and into your other open palm, and your target just falls asleep. That feels very powerful. In 2024 D&D, the spell Befuddlement can take away an opponent's spell-casting abilities. It's this edition's version of Feeble Mind. And the material component for this spell is a key ring with no keys. That feels pretty underwhelming to me for such a high-level spell, but I can still imagine a lot of ways to make this feel powerful and cool. Imagine speaking your arcane words as you run a finger across the key ring and a bunch of spectral keys appear, and you grab one of them and plunge it forward into an illusory lock and turn it. And as you do, a spectral lock appears on the forehead of your opponent as you essentially lock their mind, shutting off their access to magic. There are other spells where the material components are consumed by the spell, so think about what happens to that material component after you cast the spell. For example, when you cast Revivify, you need diamonds worth 300 gold pieces, and those diamonds are consumed by the spell. What happened to them? Do they vanish from your palm in a flash of light? Do they channel your magic through them and then they blacken and turn into coal or into valueless hunks of slag? Do they crumble to dust and turn into sparkling magical light that surrounds you? Do you fill the diamonds with holy light and then feed the diamonds to the corpse and it chews them up and comes back to life that way? Do you crack the diamond like an egg and then the soul of the deceased just pours out of it? Those are all interesting ideas, and honestly, they're only the tip of the iceberg. However, if a material component is not consumed by the spell, you can just use an arcane focus instead. A wand or a staff or a rod or a crystal or an orb or maybe a holy symbol for a cleric or a paladin or an instrument for a bard. And honestly, if you use any of those implements, you're probably already starting to think about the aesthetics of what it looks like when you cast your spells. After all, there's functionally no difference mechanically between using a wand or a staff or an orb. The only reason you might choose one over another is because you feel that implement does a better job of capturing your character, and or you're thinking about what it might look like when you use that implement to cast a spell. For a wand, do you simply wave it in the air? Or do you use it to write in the air and spell out runes and glyphs that then manifest into magic? For a staff, do you plant it in the ground? Or hold it above your head so it glows and produces magical effects? Or do you wave your staff around, manipulating your target from long range with your magic? Doctor Strange wears the Eye of Agamotto, and in the comics he also wields the Wand of Watum, and both of these are artifacts that he essentially uses as arcane focuses. The Eye of Agamotto wasn't an Infinity Stone, it's a relic worn by the Sorcerer Supreme, and it has its own magic powers, and enables you to use it to cast other magic. And also at one point in the comics it did turn out to be the actual eye of an actual guy named Agamotto. But it's an amulet he wears, and it's an incredibly iconic part of his character design, to the point where, after it gets destroyed in Infinity War and the Time Stone is taken from it, he keeps wearing the eye in his future appearances in the MCU because that's what he wears. You could easily come up with an idea for a similar amulet that can act as an arcane focus and can be an iconic part of your character design. Now, so far we've just been talking about what your character looks like when they are casting their spell. What is your character doing with their hands or their voice? But now let's ask, what does the magic actually look like when your character casts a spell? And first, let's look at how the nature of a spell can help to answer that question. Because sometimes the name of a spell and the effect it produces can give you a lot of information. Ginny D made a great video about this topic a long time ago, and I'm not just trying to crib from her video, and I'm trying to come to this topic with my own talking points, which is why this video is so much longer than hers is when she was able to cover a lot of the same topics in a much shorter video, because that's what happens when I write my scripts. It just keeps ballooning in length. But she did bring up something that wasn't in my original script, and so at this point, I'm actually going to acknowledge that this little section of the video was inspired by a section from hers, but I'll expand upon it with my own examples. Because she pointed out that some spells are actually very explicit with what they look like. For example, Chill Touch produces a ghostly hand that clasps onto the target. Obviously, you can ignore the flavor suggested by the books and come up with your own if you think it better suits your character, and we'll talk more about that in a minute when we talk about having a distinct identity to your own spellcasting. But if you're trying to figure out how to narrate any particular spell, some of the spells do offer some guidance. However, this is where I'm going to deviate from Ginny's point, because not all spells are quite so explicit as Chill Touch or Burning Hands or Disintegrate, but an individual spell can still give you a lot of ideas for how to describe it at the table. For example, the spell Inflict Wounds doesn't have any physical description attached to it. You just touch someone and they make a Constitution saving throw against 2d10 damage. But the name has always made me imagine that a bunch of wounds are literally opening across somebody's body. After all, that is literally the name of the spell. You inflict a bunch of wounds. But it also deals necrotic damage, so if you wanted to, you can instead choose to flavor it as a necrosis spreading across somebody's body, or a bunch of blackened bruises appearing beneath their skin as their blood vessels burst and you give them internal bleeding. That's why it's so important to look at all the details of the spell beyond just the title, and think about some other possible visual interpretations that you might not have thought of otherwise. Both these options would work great, but the first is primarily inspired by the name of the spell, while the second more or less ignores the name in favor of the damage type. When you cast Enhance Ability on somebody, it gives them advantage on a specific type of ability check. So if you choose Dexterity, maybe the target starts to vibrate slightly, like they're pulsing with kinetic energy. Whereas if you choose Intelligence, you might literally see a glint in their eyes that wasn't there before. However, in the previous edition, in 2014 D&D, whenever you'd cast Enhance Ability, you would invoke specific animals for each different ability score. Cat's Grace for Dexterity, Fox's Cunning for Intelligence, Owl's Wisdom for, well, Wisdom. Now that's not in the description of the spell anymore, but it would still inspire me to flavor the spell in a way that aligns with certain animals. Maybe you summon the spectral image of an animal you might associate with a certain ability score, and then that spectral animal imbues the target with their power. This description works especially well if you're playing a druid, where your magic tends to be more nature-focused to begin with. We will come back to that whole topic in a minute. Now, sometimes the fact that the spell has no description might make it difficult for you to imagine where to even start when it comes to describing your spell. Or maybe you're a game master and you have a way you're used to describing certain spells whenever your players cast them, but you want to find a different description when the spell is cast by an NPC, for reasons we'll discuss in a minute. But you're so used to the way that your group describes the spells that you're looking for some sort of help to come up with an alternative description. And whether you're a player or a game master, if you're looking for descriptions you can read aloud at your table, you should check out today's sponsor, Describe. Describe is a fantastic resource that has a whole team of writers working to create scenes that you can read aloud at your table, whether you're a game master or a player. And they have a whole collection of spell descriptions, which are perfect for providing flavor you can read aloud at your table. For example, here's a description for Healing Word. With a single word of the divine tongue, you request the healing power of your god. The answer to your plea comes swiftly. Glittering motes surround the wounds and provide some small relief from the pain they cause. And this vast library of spells also has a whole lot of versatility. There are literally hundreds of spells that have their own descriptions, like Animate Dead or Flame Blade, but for some of those spells, Describe also offers a description for casting that spell using components, which is perfect if you want to fold the components more into your roleplay. The heat of the crushed sumac leaf is escaping through your clenched fingers. You tighten your fist and the sparks spread forward, congeal to create a long streak of focused flame. Light as a feather, warping the air with heat, you grip the flame blade steadily, ready. And sometimes there's a specific description that's designed to conjure, no pun intended this time, a specific vibe or capture whether the spellcaster is sinister. We'll get to that in a second in the broader video in general, but you can see that in action with this description for a sinister casting of vampiric touch. Your hand is shrouded in a dark, sinister energy as you reach towards your opponent, corroding whatever protection they had. Hope seems to fade from their eyes, followed by their life. Your hand starts to shake as a surge of life energy rejuvenates your body. And Describe is offering a discount to the viewers of this channel. If you visit describe.com/supergeek and use the promo code supergeek at checkout, you can save 10% off of your first subscription payment. Once again, that's dscryb.com/supergeek and use the promo code supergeek. Thank you so much to Describe for sponsoring this video. Now, as we just saw in some of these spell descriptions in our sponsorship segment, another helpful trick for trying to describe the effect of your spell has to do with imagining not just what the spell does, but how do you want the spell to feel? What role do you feel this spell, or your magic in general, fills in the world? How powerful do you want this spell to seem? Do you want your magic to seem bizarre and otherworldly and unknowable? Or do you like it when it's more direct and understandable? I think this helps to answer the question of what your magic looks like. Does your healing magic look like a golden glow? Or do you call upon nature spirits to reverse the course of nature and bring back vitality and health to someone who is mortally wounded? The former is more matter-of-fact, while the latter sort of implies that you know that healing someone is a big ask. It's not minor magic, and the universe itself might deny your request. Or maybe you don't want the implication that your magic is not in your control, but you still like the idea of the healing feeling significant and costly. So maybe your magical healing is just brutal and painful as acquiring the wounds itself was, simply in reverse. Your body spasms in pain as the magic knits your flesh back together. That kind of sells the idea that this magical gift is not charming and whimsical, but brutal and not to be taken lightly. This can extend out to other senses as well. Nightcrawler from the X-Men can teleport in a puff of smoke that smells of sulfur, because the whole idea behind this character is that he looks like a demon. People think he's satanic in some way. But the irony is that he's actually a very devout Catholic, so the fact that his magic seems so demonic in nature actually provides a lot of dramatic irony that feeds into the very core concept of the character. To the point where, I don't know, hypothetically, if you actually did decide that his appearance and his sulfurous scent weren't just cruel irony, but actually were somehow linked to demons and hell itself, you might just be fundamentally missing the point of the character. Good thing nobody wrote an extremely terrible comic of where that happened. You can also think about the sound of magic. Again, Nightcrawler disappears and reappears with this extremely iconic sound effect. Bamf. On the other hand, in the movie Jumper, the sound effect is similar, but a little bit more subtle. It sounds less like a vanishing of a puff of smoke and almost more like a glitch, or like the air in a space getting displaced.
Did you think you were the only one?
In a way, this further reinforces my point about flashier magic, being more visually interesting, but more powerful magic sometimes seeming a lot more subtle, at least in the language of film. Nightcrawler has limits to his teleportation powers.
I have to be able to see where I'm going. Otherwise, I could wind up inside a wall.
Can you transport us to the ground?
Yeah, right. Like, picture this. Bumpity, 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 splat! Too high up and way too fast.
But the jumpers in Jumper can basically go anywhere across the entire planet. It's the same ability, but the less flashy version is the more powerful version. That's kind of the language of cinema in general. In fact, if you really want magic to seem very impressive, you can make it basically invisible to the naked eye so people see the result of the spell, but they don't see how you achieved it. There's no sparkles or runic circles or anything like that. The less we see, the more impressive it seems. Imagine creating a shield spell in a reaction to oncoming danger. Let's assume the somatic component is the same every time. You throw up your hand as if creating a barrier between you and whatever's about to attack you. But how visible your magic is to the naked eye is a really interesting way to determine how impressive and incomprehensible your spell casting is supposed to be. Is there a wall of glowing runes that appears in midair? A halo of rainbow light that appears only in the exact moment that the attack bounces off of it? Or is the shield literally invisible and the attack simply can't get through to you for no apparent reason? The less we see, the more impressive the magic becomes. In the first Doctor Strange movie, the filmmakers are really trying to sell us on the idea that Strange is a novice, so he only casts a few spells over and over throughout the movie, and they don't even seem to be very reliable. We literally see one of them glitch out and falter just before a battle. That's just flavor, it doesn't impact his fighting ability in any meaningful way, but it's a good way to sell the idea that this is a level 1 character who still has a lot of room to grow. But when we see him again in Thor Ragnarok, he's just a quick cameo to move the narrative to the next story beat, and so now the filmmakers don't want to undercut the character in the same way. They want him to seem cool and impressive. So almost all of his magic appears off-screen, which makes it seem almost effortless. Granted, we don't see him cast any of the same spells from the first movie. They didn't completely change the visual language of his magic. But by having him able to do all this magic with very little fanfare, he seems more impressive and powerful because everything he does seems effortless. That being said, I really like it when you can see the magic being cast, when there's a very clear visual element. I like when wizards make circles of arcane runes. I like when cleric spells manifest through a giant glowing version of their god's holy symbol. I like when you can see the cause and effect of a spell because it builds the tension of what's about to happen, and also potentially gives the players a chance to cast counterspell. And I love when different spellcasters have different visual styles because we can imagine those magics clashing in really interesting ways. This is one of the things that has always driven me crazy about the Harry Potter movies directed by David Yates. All these magical duels just become gunfights, and it's so boring. Everybody's just blasting generic magical shots at each other. This is especially maddening after the incredible duel in the Order of the Phoenix, where every spell feels distinct, like it's trying to do something specific, like these are actual wizards who have learned a whole bunch of different spells, and they're not just firing the same attack spells over and over again, like a warlock using Eldritch Blast. Sorry guys, I don't mean to hit you with a stray, but warlock players, you know that's what you do, don't deny it. But even if you are just going to have people fire generic magical blasts at each other like lasers, Star Wars taught us a long time ago that laser fights are a lot more interesting if each opposing side has a clear visual style, if their attacks are color-coded, so you know the difference between the good guys and the bad guys. And we did kind of get that with the way the good guys and bad guys in Harry Potter turn into black and white clouds. But man, I really prefer it when each spellcaster in the fight has their own specific look to their magic. Because not only is that a fun visual for those of us who like to imagine these games in our heads, or even take the time in between games to sketch out our interpretation of these iconic moments, but I also think that having a unique visual style to your magic can tell us a lot about that character. I think a lot of us have this idea in our heads that every spellcasting class in D&D has some sort of visual identity to it. Paladin magic is glowing and golden, Warlock magic is spooky, that kind of thing. Obviously that is an extreme oversimplification, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, but I think this is where a lot of people start, and it's a good place to start. Because even within that framework, there is still a lot of potential for you to form a clear visual style for your own magic, so all your spells can, if you want, still feel like they're being cast by the same person. Maybe wizards cast spells that look more like solid shapes, shields and magical runes from old arcane tomes, while a warlock's spells might look more like smoke or glass because their magic isn't connected to years of study and transcription, they're pulling this magic from another source, from a powerful patron outside of our reality. This is a really good starting point. With this approach, you can revise the description of a spell so it matches whatever class is casting it. When a wizard casts Ray of Frost, they might create a rune that looks like a snowflake, or create a beam from their open palm. But for a sorcerer, whose power is innate within their blood, they might simply blow the Ray of Frost like it's frost breath. But the more specific we get with our character, the more options we have to make our magic feel distinct. For example, maybe you're playing a warlock, and you want your magic to feel spooky, so you imagine that your spells all look like they're being summoned out of gray fog, or crackling black energy. If that's all you do, that's still a lot of detail that you can use as inspiration for your spells. That's still fantastic. But then we can zoom in on your subclass, and see how that informs what your magic might look like. For example, a Warlock of the Great Old One subclass might have magical effects that evoke tentacles or churning black void. You cast Hold Person, and as your opponent's body locks up, you can see the impression of suction cups across their skin, as if they're being held in place by long, invisible tentacles. On the other hand, the Fiend Warlock might add a hint of fire to all of their spells. Maybe when that Warlock casts Hold Person, they hold their hand like a cage, and inside of their fingers is a small dancing flame shaped like a person, struggling to break free. And when you break concentration, your hand opens, the flame vanishes, and your target is set free. But even then, we can still get more specific. Because if we look at any class that has a patron or draws power from a specific source, like a Warlock or a Cleric or a Paladin, you could make your magic even more distinct if you focus on who your patron is specifically. How does the magic represent them and who they are? Warlocks with a Fiend patron tend to have a lot of fire spells, but what if your patron is an ice demon, or is more like the devil in Dante's Inferno, sitting in the frozen pit? Well, instead of orange fire, your fire could be blue to reflect your patron's cold nature. Or if your patron is a demon in the abyss, your spells could look more like black fire, representing the dark, unknowable pit where your patron resides. On the other hand, if your patron is a Lord of Order, you might represent that by having magic that looks not just like golden light, but like these shifting geometric shapes that come together to create different magical effects, almost like the polygons of a video game. And a spellcaster who draws their power from an unknowable sea monster might have a lot of watery effects to most of their spells.
What is happening?
Speaking of blue and black fire and golden lights and color schemes in general, that's another way to get more specific with your character to make sure your magic feels unique. It corresponds to your own character's color scheme. Do you dress in that color because that's the color of your magic? Or did your magic manifest with the same color you tend to wear because it's just your favorite color? Either way, I think this approach works really well. But we can get even more specific than that, because your character's personality can be a major influence on how your magic might manifest. A no-nonsense ex-military character might cast very straightforward magic without a lot of flashy effects, whereas a cocky hotshot test pilot, whose job is literally to push the limits of what's expected, moving fast and breaking things, might use their magic in far more inventive ways, highlighting your creative approach to problem solving. The visuals around your magic can do a lot more than just representing your class or your patron. They can also be another method you can use to express your character's personality and their worldview. And all of your spells can be filtered through that lens, which means anytime you sit down to describe a new spell, your narration will be informed by the visual language you've already developed for that character and their magic. However, just because you've come up with a consistent visual style for your spellcasting doesn't mean that all of your spells have to fit into some rigid formula. In fact, deviating from that established visual style can also be really interesting. In the first Doctor Strange movie, all of Strange's magic is just golden runes and sparks. That's the visual language for the wizards in the movie. Obviously, that's a solid starting point. These sparkly sling ring portals wound up becoming one of the most iconic visuals in the entire MCU. But as a level 1 character who only knows a couple of spells, most of what he does in that film is just create sparkly golden whips and golden runic shields. But whenever he uses the Eye of Agamotto to manipulate time, we still have these arcane glyphs being conjured. It still feels like wizardly magic from the same franchise, but the eye and all the magic around it has its own color scheme, green. And this introduces a very important visual element to Doctor Strange's spellcasting. Whenever he learns a spell from a new source, that spell may come with its own visual language. I have pretty mixed feelings about that first Doctor Strange movie. Like, the plot is fine, but it's not nearly as funny as it thinks it is. But it also has 3 of my favorite scenes in the entire MCU.
There are other things that can give your life meaning.
Like what? Like you? When I became a doctor, I swore an oath to do no harm, and I have just killed a man. I'm not doing that again.
Dormammu, I've come to bargain.
But in a lot of different ways. The lack of variation in Doctor Strange's spellcasting, the lackluster humor, Benedict Cumberbatch's accent. I thought the movie did a decent job at building a foundation that I really hoped other films would build upon in the future. And I absolutely got my wish. We already talked about how much more powerful Doctor Strange seemed when he popped up for a few minutes in a Thor movie. But you have to then find a balance between making him seem incredibly powerful and still giving him limitations when he's one of the main characters of the next movie. Avengers Infinity War figured out that balance really well. He's not all-powerful, he doesn't even win his first fight in the movie, but we can also clearly see that his magic has leveled up. And one of the signifiers of that is that not everything he does is all golden sparks and shields anymore. In his one-on-one duel with Thanos, he casts something that looks a lot like chain lightning, he deflects a black hole and turns it into butterflies, and he makes 100 duplicates of himself and conjures the Crimson Bands of Sidorak. That's a spell from the comics! I remember that from the comics! And the fact that all of these magical effects don't match his typical spellcasting color scheme demonstrates how far his abilities have advanced. But he still has to do all the same sorts of hand motions, so we can still tell that he's using the same sort of spellcasting. He just knows more spells now. The same thing happens in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. He's still doing all the same hand motions, but some of his magic is just a lot weirder now. Let's talk about what we just saw. A car was about to crush a mother and her baby, and Doctor Strange summoned a glowing circle of runes and sparks, And then springing out of that circle came the gigantic head of an Egyptian hairless cat who caught the car in its mouth and disappeared into another glyph. That was basically the moment I fell in love with this movie, because they hadn't abandoned the visual style they'd established for Doctor Strange's spells. He still has a lot of glowing golden circles, lots of runes, lots of sparks. But he's high enough level that it doesn't just have to conjure the same 2 spells over and over again. He's not just conjuring his little hand shields and his little golden whip thing. In that same scene, he conjures a sword that he throws at a monster. He and Wong create golden chains to try to restrain the beast. He fires a green bolt of fire that could basically be his version of Firebolt. And he makes 2 big glowing blue demon hands that grab a lamppost and impale the monster in the eye. It feels like the filmmakers were making a conscious effort to make each new spell feel like a specific spell. Maybe not all these spells are from the comics, but you definitely get the idea that each one is meant to conjure a very specific magical effect. In fact, sometimes these spells are so specific that you find yourself wondering, wait a minute, did Doctor Strange just catch a car by conjuring a giant cat head? Did I just see that happen? And throughout the film, we continue to see the filmmakers explore everything he can do with his magic, culminating in a third act where he has a music battle with an evil Doctor Strange, and they each still have color-coded magic, gold versus purple, but their magic is far more inventive than what we've seen in the franchise so far. Then he performs a ritual where he looks into another reality, and again, this magic looks completely different than anything else he casts in the film because this is the magic of a specific ritual, and this is what this ritual looks like. Then he casts another ritual to send his consciousness into the body of his multiversal doppelganger, who has been dead for days, and transforms that character into zombie Doctor Strange, who is then attacked by the souls of the damned for violating the rules of magic, but he's able to take control of those spirits and lash them together to form a macabre version of the Cloak of Levitation, and he flies into the final battle wearing a cape made of ghosts. This movie rules. It's a very good movie. People only think this movie's bad because several scenes in this movie are extremely bad, but they're wrong. It's awesome. Okay, so based on what we've discussed so far, what can we learn about whoever cast this spell at the end of the last video and summoned this stack of Blu-rays and DVDs? Okay, well, it clearly wasn't Odwick. His magic looked totally different. He tended to just use sparkles, sometimes geometric shapes might appear, and one time he made a portal, but that was a very powerful spell. So this was not Odwick. And it wasn't some other algorithm wizard. I don't know if Odwick is the only algorithm wizard out there, or if there are others, but I can guarantee that an algorithm wizard would never suggest that I talk about the movies Jumper or Push. So this was not an algorithm wizard. But this was some sort of wizard or something. Someone cast a spell that made these movies appear. They wanted me to do research. So this was a gift from some sort of research wizard, I guess?
That's exactly right.
Hey, okay. Who are you?
I'm Zavina, the research wizard.
Hi, Zavina. So, I'm sorry if this seems rude, but what's your deal exactly?
What do you mean?
I mean that the last cartoon wizard I interacted with was not exactly here to help me. He had his own objectives and was trying to achieve those and take over my channel to do so. He basically forced me to make certain videos that he wanted me to make.
Oh, I don't have any interest in doing anything like that. I don't want to force you to make any videos you don't want to make. Like, for this video, you were already going to make it, right?
Well, yeah, it was a patron-voted video.
Exactly. I just figured you could use some help knowing where to start so you could look at specific examples to pull footage from.
Well, thank you. That was actually really helpful.
I'm glad. Now, I also know you wanted to make more videos about structuring your D&D campaign, right?
Yeah, I had more of those videos I wanted to make last year. I just never really got around to it.
Well, I can help with that. What's the next video you want to make?
Well, since I'm currently talking about a Critical Role storyline where the characters are going on these more self-contained, self-directed adventures rather than this gigantic months or year-long epic storyline about trying to save the world, I thought it'd be interesting to go back to the idea of structuring a D&D campaign like an episodic TV show, because that's kind of what's happening in this arc of Critical Role. And I touched on that topic in a video last year, but I think I could probably make a whole video about just that topic and have a lot more to say about it.
That sounds perfect. I can definitely help with that.
You can?
Absolutely. I can help steer you towards some TV shows. They do a great job of representing everything you're talking about in that video.
Okay, that sounds awesome. Just be aware, the last time I had a cartoon wizard sidekick, it really didn't end well. It wound up being this whole huge problem that took several videos, as my audience can attest, to finally resolve and deal with and get rid of him.
Well, don't worry. You don't have to worry about that happening with me.
Well, that's good news. Thank you so much for watching. Check back soon for a new video, but Of course, if you don't want to have to keep checking the channel to make sure you don't miss a video, you can stay up to date with everything I put out by just subscribing and ringing the bell. Don't forget to check out the Patreon. There's another poll up there right now to decide on another future video for this channel. Link for that is in the description. And leaving a comment. Let me know your favorite example of what magic can look like. Is it from a movie or a TV show? Is it from a novels and a detailed description of a spell? Is it from a comic? This video actually originally included a whole section about my favorite comic book art of Doctor Strange casting spells, but it wasn't like comprehensive. I haven't read like a lot of Doctor Strange solo comics. It was really just personal preference that informed what I imagine magic looks like in D&D, because Doctor Strange was in the new Avengers comics I was reading around the time I got into D&D. So I took that idea and I just made an unscripted standalone video, and it's a Patreon exclusive. It's really not heavily edited. It's not like there's any thesis or anything like that. It's literally just me talking about some comic book pages that made a big impression on me as a D&D player. So if that interests you, check out the Patreon. I'll see you very soon for the next video, and until next time, play fair and have fun.